Picture a world where tiny six-legged creatures outnumber every other animal combined, where societies of millions work in perfect harmony, where evolutionary innovations unlock entire new ways of living. This is not science fiction. This is the world we live in today, shaped by the most successful animals ever to walk, crawl, or fly across our planet. Welcome to Bedtime Biology, where science meets serenity. Each night, we explore the quiet wonders of the natural world, calming your mind and sparking your curiosity. Please, like, subscribe, and comment below with where you're checking in from. Tonight, we're embarking on an epic journey through time, tracing the remarkable story of how insects rose from humble beginnings to become the undisputed rulers of the animal kingdom. From the murky shores of ancient seas to every corner of Earth's surface, this is the story of persistence, innovation, and triumph against impossible odds. This is the story of how insects took over the world. Let the journey begin. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine stepping backward through time. Not years, not centuries, but hundreds of millions of years. The continents you know are unrecognizable, drifting slowly across the face of a younger Earth. The air itself is different, richer in oxygen, thicker somehow. And in this alien landscape, something extraordinary is about to happen. The first insects are preparing to emerge onto land. 480 million years ago, during a period we now call the early Ordovician, the world was a vastly different place. The land masses were largely barren, painted in shades of grey and brown, with only the faintest hints of green from primitive mosses and liverworts clinging to rocky surfaces near the water's edge. There were no trees, no flowers, no grass. The silence was profound, broken only by the wind and the endless rhythm of waves against primordial shores. But beneath the surface of shallow coastal waters, an evolutionary drama was unfolding that would forever change the face of our planet. Certain small crustaceans, relatives of modern shrimp and crabs, were beginning to venture onto land. These pioneering arthropods faced challenges that seem almost insurmountable to our modern minds. They had to develop ways to breathe air instead of extracting oxygen from water. They needed to prevent their bodies from drying out in the harsh, desiccating environment above the waves. They had to learn to move efficiently without the buoyant support of water. The genetic evidence tells us a fascinating story. Through careful analysis of DNA from living insects and their closest relatives, scientists have traced the insect lineage back to these ancient crustaceans. The relationship is not merely one of distant cousins. Insects, it turns out, are highly modified crustaceans, transformed by millions of years of evolution into something entirely new. This revelation has rewritten our understanding of arthropod evolution, connecting the scuttling crabs of tide pools to the delicate butterflies dancing through summer meadows by an unbroken thread of ancestry. These first insects were nothing like the diverse array we see today. They were small, wingless creatures, probably no more than a few millimeters long. Their bodies were segmented with 3 distinct sections that would become the defining characteristic of all insects to follow. A head equipped with sensory organs and mouth parts, a thorax where legs attached, and an abdomen containing the digestive and reproductive systems. They possessed 6 legs, another feature that would remain constant through hundreds of millions of years of subsequent evolution. The world they inherited was, in many ways, wide open. On land, there were few competitors and even fewer predators. The plants were simple and small, but they represented an abundant food source for any creature capable of exploiting them. These early insects likely fed on decaying plant matter, tiny spores, and perhaps the even tinier organisms that were beginning to colonize the terrestrial environment alongside them. As they spread across the land, these primitive insects began to diversify. Different lineages evolved different strategies for survival. Some burrowed into the soil, creating an entirely new ecosystem beneath the surface. Others remained on the surface, hiding under rocks and in the crevices of the sparse vegetation. They developed tougher exoskeletons to prevent water loss, more efficient respiratory systems to extract oxygen from air, and increasingly sophisticated sensory organs to navigate their new world. The fossil record from this period is frustratingly sparse. The bodies of these tiny creatures were fragile, rarely preserved in the rock record. What few fossils we have are tantalizing glimpses, fragments that hint at the diversity that must have existed. One of the most controversial specimens, a fossil called Rhyniognatha hursti, has been dated to approximately 400 million years ago. If correctly identified as an insect, it would represent one of the oldest known examples of these remarkable creatures. The fossil shows what appear to be specialized mouthparts, suggesting that even at this early stage, insects were beginning to develop the feeding specializations that would later contribute to their extraordinary success. But it was not just what these early insects were doing. It was also what they were becoming. Inside their tiny bodies, evolutionary processes were at work, generating variations, testing new possibilities. Some of these experiments failed, their carriers disappearing without a trace, but others succeeded, passing on advantageous traits to the next generation. Slowly, incrementally, insects were preparing for what would become their defining innovation, the development that would elevate them from ground-dwelling obscurity to masters of the skies. By 400 million years ago, during the early Devonian period, the stage was set. The land was greener now, with the first vascular plants beginning to grow taller, reaching upward toward the sun. These plants created new niches, new opportunities for any creature capable of exploiting them. And insects, with their modular body plan and remarkable capacity for evolutionary innovation, were poised to seize those opportunities in ways that would transform the entire planet. The scene shifts forward through geological time to approximately 406 million years ago. The landscapes are changing, becoming more complex. The first forests are beginning to emerge, though they bear little resemblance to the woodlands we know today. These are forests of giant ferns and club mosses, some reaching heights of 30 meters or more. In this increasingly three-dimensional world, with resources distributed vertically as well as horizontally, a new challenge emerges: how to move between different levels of the vegetation. Some insects responded by becoming better climbers. Others took a more radical approach. They began to fly. The evolution of flight in insects represents one of the most significant innovations in the history of animal life. It was a development that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of insect evolution and cement their position as the dominant terrestrial animals. To understand how momentous this achievement was, consider this. Insects were the first animals to evolve powered flight. They mastered the air 175 million years before the first pterosaurs took wing, and more than 350 million years before birds appeared in the skies. How did this happen? How did creatures adapted for crawling across the ground and climbing through vegetation suddenly take to the air? The truth is, we don't know for certain. The fossil record, frustratingly, contains almost no transitional forms showing the gradual development of wings. What we have instead are wingless insects from earlier periods, and then, suddenly, fully formed flying insects appearing in the fossil record from the Carboniferous period, about 320 million years ago. This gap has led to intense scientific debate and multiple competing hypotheses. One of the earliest theories proposed that wings evolved from paranotal lobes, lateral extensions of the thorax that might have initially served as gliding surfaces. Picture an insect falling or jumping from a height. Even a slight extension of the body wall might provide some lift, enough to slow the descent or extend the distance traveled. Over millions of years, natural selection could have favored larger and more elaborate extensions, eventually leading to structures capable of powered flight. Another hypothesis suggests that wings evolved from gills. This idea draws support from genetic evidence showing that certain genes involved in wing development in modern insects are also active in the gill-like structures of crustaceans. According to this theory, aquatic insect ancestors possessed gill plates on multiple body segments. As they transitioned to terrestrial life, some of these structures were co-opted and modified for a new function, eventually becoming wings. More recent research has proposed a middle ground, suggesting that wings may have evolved through a combination of these pathways. Fossil evidence and developmental studies indicate that wings may have initially developed from both dorsal extensions of the thorax and from appendages already present on the body. Through a complex process involving the fusion of different structures and the recruitment of genes from various developmental programs, the first primitive wings emerged. Whatever the precise mechanism, the result was revolutionary. The first flying insects possessed two pairs of wings attached to the middle and rear segments of the thorax. These wings were stiff, unable to fold back against the body. The insects had to keep them extended at all times, much like modern dragonflies and mayflies. The flight muscles attached directly to the base of the wings, allowing for precise control but limiting the speed at which the wings could beat. But even this primitive form of flight conferred enormous advantages. Flying insects could escape from ground-based predators with ease. They could locate food sources from the air, spotting new plants, or finding mates over distances that would have been impossible for ground-dwelling insects. They could colonize new habitats, crossing barriers like rivers and valleys that would have been impassable for their wingless relatives. The Carboniferous period, from 359 to 299 million years ago, was the golden age of early flying insects. The atmosphere contained more oxygen than at any time before or since, reaching levels of 35% compared to today's 21%. This oxygen-rich air could support larger body sizes, and insects took full advantage. Dragonfly-like creatures called griffinflies soared through the ancient forests with wingspans exceeding 1/2 meter. These were not true dragonflies, but rather members of a related extinct group called the Protodonata. They were apex predators of their time, hunting other flying insects and perhaps even small vertebrates. The forests they flew through were strange and wonderful. Giant club mosses and horsetails formed dense canopies 30 meters high. the forest floor was a tangle of fallen logs and thick vegetation, creating a complex three-dimensional habitat. In this environment, flight was not merely useful, it was transformative. It allowed insects to exploit resources and occupy niches that would otherwise have been inaccessible. As insects mastered flight, they also began to diversify their wing designs. Different lineages evolved different solutions to the challenges of aerial locomotion. Some developed forewings that were harder and more protective, serving as covers for the delicate hindwings folded beneath them. This innovation led to the evolution of beetles, which would eventually become the most diverse group of insects on Earth. Others evolved the ability to fold their wings back over their abdomens when not flying, a seemingly simple modification that nevertheless represented a major advance, allowing insects to navigate through dense vegetation and to squeeze into tight spaces for shelter. The Hymenoptera, the group that includes wasps, bees and ants, evolved a mechanism to couple their fore and hind wings together during flight, essentially creating a single larger wing surface. This provided greater lift and more efficient flight. Flies took a different approach entirely, reducing their hind wings to small club-shaped structures called halteres. These act as gyroscopic sensors, providing information about rotation and helping the fly maintain stability during the rapid acrobatic maneuvers for which they are famous. Perhaps most remarkably, some insects evolved the ability to decouple their wing movements from their nervous system, allowing for much faster wing beats. In these insects, the flight muscles don't attach directly to the wings. Instead, they attach to the walls of the thorax. When these muscles contract, they deform the thorax, and this deformation causes the wings to move. This indirect flight system allows for asynchronous muscle contractions, where a single nerve impulse can trigger multiple muscle contractions. The result is wing beat frequencies far higher than would be possible with direct flight muscles. Some midges can beat their wings more than 1,000 times per second, creating the familiar high-pitched whine we associate with mosquitoes and gnats. Flight also drove the evolution of increasingly sophisticated sensory systems. Eyes became more complex, with many insects developing large compound eyes capable of detecting rapid movement and perceiving a wider spectrum of colors than humans can see. Antennae became more elaborate, detecting not just smells, but also air currents and vibrations. The insect brain evolved specialized regions for processing the sensory information needed for flight, calculating distances, tracking moving objects, and coordinating the complex muscle movements required to stay aloft. The ability to fly also facilitated the evolution of complex life cycles and behaviors. Flying insects could locate specific host plants for their larvae, even if those plants were widely scattered across the landscape. They could find mates over long distances, leading to the evolution of elaborate courtship behaviors and sexual signals. Some species evolved long-distance migration, traveling hundreds or even thousands of kilometers between feeding grounds and breeding sites. By the end of the Carboniferous period, insects had established themselves as the dominant aerial animals. They had diversified into numerous distinct lineages, each with its own variations on the basic theme of six-legged, winged arthropods. They had colonized virtually every terrestrial habitat, from deserts to rainforests, from mountaintops to underground caves, and they were just getting started. The Permian period, lasting from 299 to 252 million years ago saw continued diversification of insects. Most of the major insect orders we recognize today had evolved by this time. Beetles were abundant, their hard wing covers allowing them to burrow into wood and soil. True bugs had appeared with their distinctive piercing and sucking mouthparts. Mayflies and dragonflies were common around freshwater habitats. The stage was set for insects to become even more diverse and dominant. But then came catastrophe. At the end of the Permian period, approximately 252 million years ago, the Earth experienced the most devastating mass extinction event in its history. Volcanic eruptions on an unimaginable scale in what is now Siberia released vast quantities of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Global temperatures soared. Ocean chemistry changed dramatically, becoming more acidic and losing oxygen. On land, forests died and deserts expanded. The extinction was apocalyptic. It's estimated that 96% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrate species disappeared. Entire ecosystems collapsed. But insects, despite suffering significant losses, survived. Approximately 30% of insect species went extinct, a devastating blow, but far less severe than the losses suffered by many other groups. Why did insects fare better? Several factors likely contributed to their survival. Their small size meant they required less food and could survive on minimal resources during the worst periods. Their rapid generation times allowed them to evolve and adapt quickly to changing conditions. Many insects have complex life cycles, with different stages occupying different ecological niches. If one habitat became uninhabitable, insects with aquatic larvae, for example, might survive in water even as terrestrial habitats collapsed. Their ability to fly allowed them to disperse widely, seeking out whatever refugia remained. In the aftermath of the extinction, as the Earth slowly recovered, insects were among the first groups to diversify and expand. The Triassic period that followed saw the rise of new insect groups. The survivors of the Permian extinction evolved into forms that would persist, largely unchanged, to the present day. Modern insect families began to appear, recognizable ancestors of the crickets, cockroaches, and beetles we see around us now. The Jurassic period, from 201 to 145 million years ago, brought new opportunities. Dinosaurs dominated the land, but insects remained incredibly diverse and abundant. Many modern insect families appeared during this time. The Cretaceous period that followed would bring perhaps the most important development in insect evolution since the origin of flight: the partnership between insects and flowering plants. Throughout this vast sweep of time, through mass extinctions and climate changes, through the rise and fall of continents and the evolution and extinction of countless other life forms, insects persisted. They adapted, they diversified, they spread across the globe, filling every available niche, exploiting every possible food source. And they were about to undergo yet another transformation, one that would produce some of the most complex and sophisticated behaviors ever evolved by any animal. Imagine being able to completely rebuild your body during your lifetime. To start life as a crawling, leaf-eating machine, then enter a deep sleep and emerge as a nectar-sipping creature of the air, bearing almost no resemblance to your former self. This is not fantasy or science fiction. This is metamorphosis, and it represents one of the most remarkable innovations in the entire history of insect evolution. Metamorphosis is the process by which an insect transforms from one life stage to another, often with dramatic changes in body form, diet, and behavior. It's a strategy that has proven so successful that more than 80% of all insect species employ some form of it. But metamorphosis comes in different forms, each representing a different solution to the challenges of growing up as an insect. The simpler form, called incomplete or hemimetabolous metamorphosis, involves three main stages: egg, nymph, and adult. An insect egg hatches into a nymph, which looks like a smaller version of the adult, though often without fully developed wings. The nymph feeds and grows, but like all arthropods, it faces a fundamental problem. Its exoskeleton, the hard outer shell that provides support and protection, cannot grow. To increase in size, the nymph must periodically shed its exoskeleton in a process called molting, emerging with a new, larger one that hardens over time. Each time a nymph molts, it enters a new developmental stage called an instar. With each successive instar, the nymph becomes more similar to the adult form. Its wing buds, if present, grow larger and more developed. Its body proportions change. After several molts, usually anywhere from 4 to 8 depending on the species, the nymph undergoes a final molt and emerges as a fully formed adult, complete with functional wings and reproductive organs. Insects using this developmental pathway include grasshoppers, crickets, cockroaches, dragonflies, true bugs, and many others. The advantage of this system is its relative simplicity. The nymph doesn't need to undergo a radical transformation. It can often live in the same habitat and eat the same food as the adult, though in some groups, like dragonflies and mayflies, the nymphs are aquatic while the adults are terrestrial, representing a more dramatic ecological shift. But there's a potential downside to this approach. Because nymphs and adults often occupy similar ecological niches, they may compete with each other for food and space. A young grasshopper eats the same plants as its parents, potentially creating competition within the species. This limitation may have driven the evolution of the more complex form of metamorphosis. Complete or holometabolous metamorphosis involves 4 distinct life stages: egg, larva, pupa, and adult. This developmental pathway represents a more radical approach to growing up. The egg hatches into a larva that looks nothing like the adult insect. A caterpillar bears no obvious resemblance to a butterfly. A maggot shows no sign of the fly it will become. A grub gives no hint of the beetle it contains. The larval stage is dedicated almost entirely to feeding and growth. Larvae are eating machines, often consuming many times their own body weight each day. A caterpillar may increase its mass 10,000-fold between hatching and pupation. This allows for very rapid accumulation of the resources needed for the transformation to come. And because larvae look and behave so differently from adults, they typically occupy completely different ecological niches. Caterpillars chew leaves, while butterflies sip nectar. Beetle larvae burrow through wood, while adult beetles fly in search of mates. This separation eliminates competition between juveniles and adults of the same species. After a series of larval molts, the insect enters perhaps the most mysterious and fascinating stage, the pupa. From the outside, the pupa often appears inactive, a dormant capsule waiting for spring or favorable conditions. Some pupae, like the chrysalis of a butterfly, hang suspended from a branch. Others, like the pupae of many moths, are enclosed in silk cocoons. Fly pupae often form hard cases called puparia. But inside these seemingly inert structures, one of nature's most dramatic transformations is taking place. During pupation, much of the larval body is broken down through a process called histolysis. Specialized cells, called histocytes, secrete enzymes that dissolve most of the larval tissues, turning them into a kind of cellular soup. But not everything is destroyed. Scattered throughout the larval body are clusters of cells called imaginal discs. These cells have been present since the larval stage, but they've remained dormant, waiting. Now, bathed in the nutrients released by the breakdown of larval tissues, these imaginal discs begin to grow and differentiate. Each imaginal disc is programmed to form a specific part of the adult body. There are discs for wings, for legs, for eyes, for antennae. As the pupa develops, these discs grow and elaborate, eventually forming all the complex structures of the adult insect. New organs form. The digestive system is rebuilt, often completely restructured to accommodate a different diet. The nervous system is reorganized. Wings grow and develop their intricate network of veins. Compound eyes form, with thousands of individual lenses assembled into precise arrays. This process is controlled by hormones, chemical messengers that coordinate development. The hormone S-adisone triggers molting and metamorphosis, while juvenile hormone determines whether a molt will produce another larval instar or progress to the pupal stage. The precise timing and concentration of these hormones orchestrate the entire transformation, ensuring that all the different body parts develop in coordination with each other. When metamorphosis is complete, the adult insect emerges from the pupal case in a process called eclosion, a butterfly splitting open its chrysalis, expanding its crumpled wings by pumping them full of hemolymph, a beetle pushing up through the soil, its new exoskeleton still soft and pale. The timing of emergence is often exquisitely calibrated to match favorable environmental conditions or the availability of food sources. The evolution of complete metamorphosis was a watershed moment in insect evolution. It first appeared sometime in the early Carboniferous period, more than 300 million years ago. The insects that evolved this developmental strategy, called the Holometabola, went on to become spectacularly successful. Today, insects with complete metamorphosis account for approximately 60% of all described animal species on Earth. The group includes beetles, butterflies and moths, flies, wasps, bees, and ants. Beetles alone, with over 380,000 described species, are the most diverse group of animals on the planet. The advantages of complete metamorphosis are numerous. By separating the feeding stage from the reproductive stage, it allows for specialization. Larvae can be optimized for eating and growing, with powerful jaws and digestive systems. Adults can be optimized for reproduction and dispersal, with wings for flight and sensory organs for finding mates. This division of labor between life stages has proven remarkably successful. Complete metamorphosis also allows insects to exploit different resources at different times of year. Many species time their development so that adults emerge when specific food plants are flowering, or when conditions for reproduction are optimal. Some insects can extend the pupal stage, remaining dormant for months or even years until conditions are favorable for the next stage. This flexibility has allowed insects to colonize seasonal environments and to survive periods of drought or cold that would be lethal to actively feeding stages. The evolution of metamorphosis also opened up new possibilities for ecological specialization. Some insects evolved life cycles where different stages live in completely different habitats. Mosquitoes and many other flies have aquatic larvae but terrestrial adults. Some beetles have wood-boring larvae but flower-visiting adults. This allows a single species to exploit multiple environments, spreading risk and accessing resources that might not be continuously available. But metamorphosis is not just about eating and growing. It's also about preparation and timing. Many insects enter a state called diapause during one of their developmental stages, usually as a pupa or egg. Diapause is a kind of arrested development, controlled by hormones and often triggered by environmental cues like day length or temperature. An insect in diapause can survive harsh conditions, emerging when the environment becomes favorable again. This adaptation has allowed insects to colonize temperate regions with harsh winters and tropical regions with dry seasons. The hormonal control of metamorphosis has also proven to be remarkably flexible evolutionarily. Small changes in the timing or concentration of developmental hormones can produce dramatic changes in adult morphology. This has allowed for rapid evolution of new body forms and has contributed to the extraordinary diversity of insects. In some cases, different individuals within the same species can develop into dramatically different adult forms depending on environmental conditions during development, a phenomenon called polyphenism. The most extreme examples of polyphenism occur in social insects, like ants and termites, where different individuals within a colony develop into distinct castes with specialized roles. We'll explore this phenomenon more deeply in just a moment. But first, let's step back and consider what metamorphosis means for insect success. By decoupling the feeding stage from the reproductive stage, by allowing different life stages to exploit different resources, by providing flexibility in timing and development, metamorphosis has been one of the key innovations that allowed insects to achieve their current extraordinary diversity and abundance. In a quiet moment, if you watch a caterpillar munch its way through a leaf, you're witnessing more than just an animal feeding. You're seeing one stage in a transformation that has its roots hundreds of millions of years in the past. A transformation that helped insects become the most successful animals ever to live on land. And that transformation continues all around us, in every season, in every environment where insects are found, which is to say, everywhere. Now, let us turn our attention to perhaps the most sophisticated of all insect innovations, the evolution of societies. For while many insects live solitary lives, some have evolved levels of social organization that rival or exceed those of our own species in their complexity and efficiency. Picture a city of millions, where every citizen knows their role, where cooperation is perfect, and where the needs of the community always take precedence over individual desires. This is not a human utopia. This is an ant colony, and the evolution of such societies represents one of the most remarkable transitions in the history of life. Social behavior in insects reaches its pinnacle in what scientists call eusociality. The word comes from Greek, meaning truly social, and it describes societies with very specific characteristics. A eusocial society has reproductive division of labor, where only some individuals reproduce, while others forego reproduction to help raise the offspring of breeders. It has overlapping generations, with parents and offspring living together and cooperating. And it features cooperative care of young, where individuals help raise offspring that are not their own. These three characteristics define eusociality, and they represent a radical departure from the typical animal lifestyle. For most animals, reproduction is the ultimate goal. Every individual strives to pass on its genes to the next generation. But in eusocial insects, most individuals never reproduce at all. Instead, they devote their entire lives to helping their queen or a small number of reproductive individuals produce offspring. From a purely evolutionary perspective, this seems paradoxical. How can natural selection favor individuals who don't reproduce? The answer lies in the concept of kin selection and inclusive fitness, developed by evolutionary biologist William Hamilton in the 1960s. The key insight is that genes can be passed on, not just through your own offspring, but also through the offspring of your relatives, who share many of your genes. By helping raise your siblings, you're actually helping copies of your own genes survive and propagate. In some insects, particularly in the Hymenoptera, a quirk of genetics makes this strategy especially effective. Hymenoptera, the group that includes ants, bees, and wasps, have an unusual sex determination system called haplodiploidy. Female Hymenoptera are diploid, meaning they have two sets of chromosomes, one from each parent. But males are haploid, developing from unfertilized eggs and having only one set of chromosomes from their mother. This has a strange consequence for relatedness. Because males have no father, all the sperm they produce is genetically identical. This means that sisters share 75% of their genes with each other, more than the 50% they would share with their own offspring. This genetic quirk may have predisposed Hymenoptera toward the evolution of eusociality, though it's worth noting that eusociality has also evolved in groups without haplodiploidy, including termites, some beetles, some aphids, and even a few species of shrimp. Clearly, there's more to the story than genetics alone. Let's trace the evolution of eusociality through the lens of one remarkable group, the ants. All ants are eusocial. Every one of the more than 13,000 known species lives in colonies with a reproductive queen and sterile workers. But ants weren't always this way. They evolved from wasp-like ancestors sometime during the Cretaceous period, probably between 140 and 110 million years ago. The ancestors of ants were likely solitary wasps that hunted other insects to feed their larvae. Some of these wasps began to build more permanent nests, returning to the same location to raise successive broods of offspring. In some species, daughters began to remain at the natal nest rather than dispersing to build their own nests. Perhaps environmental conditions made nest sites scarce, or perhaps predation pressure was high, making cooperative defense advantageous. Once daughters began staying at the nest, there would have been opportunities for cooperation. Multiple females working together could build larger nests, hunt more effectively, and defend against predators more successfully. But there would also have been conflict, as each female attempted to maximize her own reproduction. Over time, as colonies grew larger and more permanent, reproductive skew became more pronounced. One or a few females would monopolize most of the egg-laying, while other females focused more on foraging and nest maintenance. The key transition to true eusociality came when some individuals completely lost the ability to reproduce, becoming a permanently sterile worker caste. This transition was probably gradual, with flexible division of labor slowly giving way to fixed castes determined during development. In modern ants, queens and workers are often dramatically different in size and appearance, reflecting their specialized roles. Queens are typically larger, with wings during their mating flight, and large ovaries for producing eggs. Workers are smaller, wingless, and have reduced or absent reproductive organs. But workers are not all the same. In many ant species, there are multiple worker castes, each specialized for different tasks. Minor workers might focus on caring for larvae and maintaining the nest. Media workers might forage for food. Major workers, sometimes called soldiers, have large heads and powerful jaws for defense or for processing tough food items. In some species, soldiers have heads so large and jaws so specialized that they cannot feed themselves and must be fed by their smaller nestmates. The division of labor in ant colonies is remarkably sophisticated. Tasks are allocated flexibly based on the colony's needs. Young workers typically start by working inside the nest, caring for eggs and larvae. As they age, they transition to different tasks, eventually becoming foragers who leave the nest to search for food. This age-based division of labor, called temporal polyethism, is modulated by colony needs. If foragers are lost to predation, younger workers will transition to foraging earlier than they otherwise would. Ants communicate primarily through chemical signals called pheromones. A scout that discovers a food source will lay a pheromone trail back to the nest, allowing other workers to follow the chemical path to the food. The strength of the trail increases as more ants follow it and add their own pheromones, creating a positive feedback loop that can mobilize hundreds or thousands of workers to exploit a rich resource. Once the food is depleted, ants stop reinforcing the trail and the pheromones evaporate, naturally ending the recruitment. Different pheromones convey different messages. An alarm pheromone can rapidly mobilize workers to defend against a threat. Queen pheromones help maintain the social structure, suppressing reproduction in workers and signaling the presence of a healthy, fertile queen. Trail pheromones from different workers can create complex patterns of recruitment and trail networks, allowing colonies to efficiently exploit resources over large areas. The sophistication of ant societies is astonishing. Some ant species practice agriculture, cultivating fungi in underground gardens. Leafcutter ants cut pieces of leaves and bring them back to the nest, but they don't eat the leaves. Instead, they chew the leaves into a pulp and use it as a substrate for growing fungus, which they then harvest and eat. These ants have been farming for 50 million years, far longer than humans. Other ants are herders, tending aphids and protecting them from predators in exchange for the sweet honeydew the aphids excrete. Some ants are warriors, conducting raids on the colonies of other ant species, stealing their pupae and raising them as slaves. Army ants are nomadic predators that form massive raiding columns containing hundreds of thousands of individuals, overwhelming and consuming any prey they encounter. The success of ants is undeniable. They are found on every continent except Antarctica. In many ecosystems, ants represent the largest fraction of animal biomass, sometimes exceeding the combined weight of all vertebrates in the same area. Their colonies can be enormous. A single supercolony of Argentine ants in southern Europe extends for 6,000 kilometers along the Mediterranean coast and contains billions of workers. But ants are not the only eusocial insects. Bees have independently evolved similar social structures. The honeybee colony is perhaps the most studied insect society, with a single queen, tens of thousands of workers, and seasonal production of males called drones. Workers perform different tasks based on age, starting as nurse bees caring for larvae, then transitioning to building comb, processing and storing food, and finally becoming foragers. Honeybees are famous for their sophisticated communication system. The waggle dance, performed by a forager bee that has found a good food source, communicates both the direction and distance to the food. The bee dances in a figure-8 pattern with a straight waggle run in the middle. The angle of the waggle run relative to vertical indicates the direction to the food relative to the sun. The duration of the waggle run indicates the distance. Other bees in the hive watch the dance and can use this information to fly directly to the food source, even if they've never been there before. Termites represent yet another independent evolution of eusociality. Unlike ants and bees, termites are diploid, not haplodiploid, yet they've evolved some of the most complex insect societies. Termite colonies can contain millions of individuals and persist for decades. They build elaborate nests, some of which tower several meters above the ground, with sophisticated ventilation systems that maintain temperature and humidity. Inside these nests, termites cultivate fungi, much like the leafcutter ants, and they've evolved a remarkable symbiotic relationship with microorganisms in their guts that allow them to digest wood, a food source that's abundant but notoriously difficult to process. The evolution of eusociality has occurred multiple times independently in different insect groups. Beyond ants, bees, wasps, and termites, it has also evolved in some beetles, in some aphids, in some thrips, and in a few other groups. Each time, the same basic features emerge: reproductive division of labor, overlapping generations, cooperative care of young. This convergent evolution suggests that eusociality, once achieved, is a highly successful strategy. What makes eusocial insects so successful? Their strength lies in cooperation and specialization. By dividing labor among individuals, colonies can accomplish tasks that would be impossible for solitary insects. They can build massive structures, defend resources aggressively, exploit food sources efficiently, and survive conditions that would kill isolated individuals. A single ant is vulnerable, but a colony of 1 million ants is a formidable force. Eusocial insects have shaped ecosystems around the world. They are major predators, consuming vast quantities of other insects. They are important decomposers, breaking down dead wood and other organic matter. They are ecosystem engineers, modifying their environment in ways that affect countless other species. They are pollinators, with bees alone responsible for pollinating a significant fraction of the world's crops and wild plants. From humble origins as solitary wasps and roaches, these insects have evolved societies of breathtaking complexity. Societies that in some ways mirror our own in their division of labor, communication, and cooperation. And they remind us that complex social structures are not unique to vertebrates, not unique to mammals, not unique to primates. They are one more example of the extraordinary evolutionary achievements of insects. The story of insect success is, in large part, a story of partnerships. And among all the partnerships insects have formed, none has been more consequential than their relationship with flowering plants. 130 million years ago, during the early Cretaceous period, a revolution was beginning. The first flowering plants, or angiosperms, were appearing on Earth. These plants were different from anything that had come before. Instead of relying on wind to carry their pollen, many of them developed a new strategy. They would entice animals to do the work for them. Flowers are advertisements. They are colourful, fragrant displays designed to attract animal visitors. The plants offer rewards: nectar, rich in sugars and amino acids, or pollen packed with protein. In exchange, visiting animals inadvertently pick up pollen on their bodies and carry it to other flowers, facilitating fertilization. This system of animal pollination would prove to be one of the most successful innovations in plant evolution, and insects would become the primary pollinators. The partnership between flowering plants and insects is ancient, intimate, and profound. It has shaped the evolution of both groups, creating a web of dependencies and specializations that spans millions of species. This is coevolution in its most dramatic form, where two groups of organisms exert reciprocal selective pressures on each other over millions of years, each adapting to changes in the other. The earliest pollinators of flowering plants were probably beetles. Beetles were already abundant when angiosperms first appeared, and many fed on pollen or other plant parts. The first flowers were likely simple, bowl-shaped structures that provided easy access to pollen and reproductive organs. Beetles would visit these flowers to feed, becoming dusted with pollen in the process and carrying it to other flowers. But beetles are messy pollinators. They chew and destroy much of the pollen and floral tissue they encounter. Over time, plants evolved flowers that were more sophisticated, with specialized structures to guide pollinators and protect reproductive organs. And insects evolved to become more efficient at extracting nectar and pollen, developing specialized mouthparts, sensory organs, and behaviors. Consider the evolution of the long nectar spur. Some flowers evolved tube-like extensions, placing nectar at the bottom of long, narrow tubes. To access this nectar, pollinators needed correspondingly long tongues, or proboscises. This created a selective pressure on pollinating insects to evolve longer mouthparts. And longer mouthparts in pollinators created selective pressure on flowers to evolve even longer nectar spurs, reserving their resources for the most effective pollinators. The most famous example of this co-evolutionary arms race involves a Madagascan orchid called Angraecum sesquipedale. This orchid has a nectar spur that can exceed 30 centimeters in length. When Charles Darwin first examined this flower in 1862, he predicted that there must exist a moth with a proboscis long enough to reach the nectar at the bottom of the spur. At the time, no such moth was known, and Darwin's prediction was met with skepticism. But in 1903, over 40 years later, a subspecies of hawk moth with a proboscis measuring over 25 centimeters was discovered in Madagascar. The moth was named Xanthopan morgani predictor, with predictor meaning predicted, in honor of Darwin's insight. This intimate relationship extends far beyond simple nectar feeding. Many flowering plants have evolved flowers with specific shapes, colors, and scents that appeal to particular groups of pollinators. Bee-pollinated flowers are often blue or yellow, colors that bees can see well. They often have ultraviolet nectar guides, patterns visible to bees but invisible to us, that point the way to nectar. Butterfly-pollinated flowers are often red or orange, have a landing platform, and produce nectar during the day when butterflies are active. Moth-pollinated flowers are often white or pale, heavily scented, and produce nectar at night. Some partnerships have become remarkably specific. Fig trees and fig wasps have co-evolved for tens of millions of years. Each species of fig has its own species of fig wasp that pollinates it and no other. A female fig wasp enters the enclosed fig flower through a tiny opening, losing her wings in the process. She pollinates the flowers inside while laying her eggs. The next generation of wasps develops inside the fig, then emerges, mates, and flies off to find new figs, carrying pollen with them. Neither the fig nor the wasp can reproduce without the other. It's an obligate mutualism, a partnership where both parties are completely dependent on each other for survival. Orchids have evolved some of the most elaborate pollination strategies in the plant kingdom. Some orchids mimic female insects, producing flowers that look and smell like female wasps or bees. Male insects attempt to mate with the flowers and in the process become covered with pollen. It's a deceptive strategy, offering no reward to the pollinator, but it's effective. Other orchids have evolved explosive pollen dispersal mechanisms, catapulting pollen packets onto visiting insects. The yucca plant and yucca moth have formed another obligate partnership. The female yucca moth collects pollen from one yucca flower, then flies to another flower. There, she lays her eggs inside the flower's ovary, and then deliberately pollinates the flower by depositing the pollen she collected onto the stigma. The yucca seeds develop, and some of them are eaten by the moth larvae, but enough survive to ensure the plant's reproduction. The moth larvae depend entirely on yucca seeds for food, and the yucca depends entirely on the moth for pollination. These specialized partnerships are remarkable, but most plant-pollinator relationships are more generalized. A single plant species might be visited by dozens of different insect species, and a single insect species might visit many different plants. These generalist relationships create complex networks of interactions. Changes in one species can ripple through the network, affecting many others. The coevolution of insects and flowering plants has driven tremendous diversification in both groups. There are over 350,000 species of flowering plants, and many of the most diverse plant families are those that rely heavily on insect pollination. Similarly, many of the most diverse insect groups, including bees, butterflies, moths, and flies, include numerous species that depend on flowers for food. Bees, in particular, have evolved a remarkably close association with flowering plants. Most bee species are solitary, with females building individual nests and provisioning them with pollen and nectar for their offspring. These solitary bees have evolved an astonishing variety of specializations. Some have specialized hairs for collecting pollen. Others have specialized behaviors, like cutting pieces of leaves to line their nests or using plant oils instead of nectar. The importance of pollination cannot be overstated. It's estimated that approximately 88% of flowering plants depend on animal pollination, and the vast majority of those are pollinated by insects. This includes many of the crops humans depend on for food. Without insect pollinators, our agricultural systems would collapse, and ecosystems around the world would be fundamentally altered. But the partnership between insects and flowering plants extends beyond pollination. Many insects have evolved to feed on specific plants, and their larvae are often highly specialized herbivores. The monarch butterfly, for example, lays its eggs exclusively on milkweed plants. The caterpillars feed on milkweed, sequestering toxic compounds from the plant that make them unpalatable to predators. The plant-insect relationship has driven the evolution of plant defenses, including thorns, tough leaves, and toxic chemicals. And insects have evolved counter-adaptations, including the ability to detoxify plant poisons, sequester them for their own defense, or simply tolerate them. This ongoing evolutionary interaction has created extraordinary diversity. It has produced the riot of colors we see in meadows and gardens, the astonishing variety of flower shapes and fragrances, and the bewildering array of insect forms and behaviors. It has shaped entire ecosystems and continues to do so today. As we stand in a flower garden on a summer day, watching bees and butterflies move from bloom to bloom, we are witnessing a partnership forged over 100 million years. We are seeing co-evolution in action, the product of countless generations of mutual adaptation. And we are seeing yet another reason why insects have been so successful: their ability to form partnerships, to exploit new resources, to adapt to changes in other organisms. While partnerships with plants helped insects thrive, it was their remarkable capacity for adaptation that allowed them to conquer virtually every environment on Earth. From the frozen wastes of Antarctica to the scorching deserts of the Sahara, from high mountain peaks to deep underground caves, insects have found ways to survive and thrive. Let us explore how they did it. Insects are ectothermic, meaning their body temperature depends largely on their environment. They cannot generate heat internally the way mammals and birds do. This might seem like a disadvantage, but insects have turned it into a strength. By not spending energy on maintaining a constant body temperature, they can survive on far less food than warm-blooded animals of similar size. But being ectothermic also means that insects must cope with temperature extremes. In the Arctic, some insects survive temperatures that would kill most other animals. The Arctic woolly bear caterpillar can endure temperatures as low as -70 degrees Celsius. It accomplishes this feat through a combination of behavioral and physiological adaptations. As winter approaches, the caterpillar produces high concentrations of glycerol and other cryoprotectants in its body fluids. These compounds act as a natural antifreeze, preventing ice crystals from forming inside cells and damaging them. But some Arctic insects go even further. They don't just prevent freezing, they tolerate it. The wood frog and certain insects can allow much of their body water to freeze solid. Ice forms between cells, but special compounds protect the cells themselves from damage. Their hearts stop beating. Their breathing ceases. They are, by any reasonable definition, frozen solid. Yet, when spring arrives and temperatures rise, they thaw out and resume normal activity as if nothing had happened. At the other temperature extreme, insects in hot deserts must cope with scorching heat and desiccation. Many desert insects avoid the worst heat by being active only at night or during the cooler hours of dawn and dusk. They burrow underground during the hottest parts of the day, emerging only when temperatures become tolerable. Their exoskeletons are often thicker than those of insects in more temperate climates, providing better protection against water loss. Some desert insects have evolved remarkable physiological adaptations. The Saharan silver ant can tolerate body temperatures up to 53 degrees Celsius, far higher than most insects can survive. It accomplishes this partly through specialized proteins called heat shock proteins that help protect cellular structures from damage at high temperatures. The ant can also sprint at incredible speeds, crossing the scorching desert sand in brief forays to scavenge dead insects before its body temperature becomes lethal. Water is precious in deserts, and desert insects have evolved ingenious ways to obtain it. Some beetles in the Namib Desert of southern Africa collect water from fog. They climb to the tops of dunes early in the morning when fog rolls in from the ocean. They tilt their bodies at an angle, allowing fog droplets to condense on their bumpy backs. The droplets run down channels in the exoskeleton and into the beetle's mouth. This simple behavior allows them to survive in one of the driest places on Earth. Insects have also conquered extreme altitudes. Some species of flies and beetles have been found living at elevations over 6,000 meters in the Himalayas, higher than any other terrestrial animals except for a few spiders. At these altitudes, temperatures are frigid, oxygen is scarce, and ultraviolet radiation is intense. Yet insects persist, feeding on wind-blown debris and surviving the harsh conditions through a combination of cold tolerance, efficient oxygen utilization, and behavioral adaptations like seeking shelter among rocks. Perhaps the most extreme insect adaptations involve life in environments that seem utterly inhospitable. Some fly larvae can survive in pools of crude oil. Others live in hot springs with temperatures exceeding 50 degrees Celsius. Certain beetle larvae can complete their entire development inside jars of preserved specimens, feeding on dead insects pickled in alcohol. The larvae of some flies develop in extremely alkaline pools where the pH exceeds 11, conditions that would dissolve most organic tissues. Caves present their own unique challenges, with permanent darkness, limited food, and often high humidity. Cave-dwelling insects have evolved accordingly, often losing their eyes and pigmentation, since neither is useful in perpetual darkness. They develop elongated antennae and legs, enhancing their ability to navigate by touch in the dark. Many cave insects have extremely slow metabolisms, allowing them to survive on the meager food resources available in these isolated ecosystems. The ability of insects to survive extreme conditions often depends on a developmental stage particularly suited to stress tolerance. For many insects, this is the pupal stage. Pupae can enter diapause, a state of arrested development that allows them to survive months or even years of unfavorable conditions. Some insects can survive complete desiccation as pupae, losing nearly all their body water and entering a state of suspended animation called anhydrobiosis, then rehydrating and completing development when water becomes available again. Insect eggs are also remarkably resistant to harsh conditions. They often have tough, waterproof shells that protect the developing embryo from temperature extremes, desiccation, and even chemical exposure. Some insect eggs can survive being frozen, dried, or subjected to high levels of radiation that would be lethal to adults. Perhaps most remarkably, insects have even adapted to environments shaped by human activity. Urban insects thrive among concrete and steel, feeding on our food waste, living in our buildings, and exploiting the heat islands that cities create. Agricultural insects have evolved resistance to pesticides with remarkable speed, often developing new resistance mechanisms within just a few generations of exposure to a new chemical. The molecular mechanisms underlying insect stress tolerance are diverse and sophisticated. Heat shock proteins, as mentioned earlier, help protect cells from damage at high temperatures. Antifreeze proteins prevent ice crystal formation at low temperatures. Detoxification enzymes allow insects to break down plant toxins and synthetic pesticides. Specialized metabolic pathways allow some insects to survive on highly unusual diets, from wood to wax to dried blood. What all these examples illustrate is the extraordinary adaptive capacity of insects. Given enough time and selective pressure, insects can evolve solutions to almost any environmental challenge. This adaptability is rooted in their basic biology: small size, short generation times, and enormous population sizes. These features allow for rapid evolution. A single ant colony might produce thousands of new individuals in a season. A fruit fly population can go through dozens of generations in a year. With so many individuals being born in each generation, there are ample opportunities for beneficial mutations to arise and spread. This adaptability has allowed insects to spread across the globe, colonizing every terrestrial environment, and even some aquatic ones. It has allowed them to survive multiple mass extinctions, climate changes, and the rise and fall of countless other species. It has made them resilient in the face of human impacts, for better or worse, and it has contributed enormously to their current status as the dominant terrestrial animals. Having conquered every environment, insects have also come to play critical roles in the functioning of ecosystems. They are not merely passengers on Earth. They are engineers, architects, and custodians of the natural world. Let us now explore the invisible work they perform. In forests around the world, a silent transformation is always underway. Fallen leaves pile up on the forest floor. Branches break and tumble down. Animals die, and their bodies lie still. Without something to process this accumulating debris, the forest would soon be buried under its own waste. Nutrients would be locked away in dead tissue, unavailable to living plants. The cycle of life would grind to a halt. This is where insects step in, performing one of the most essential yet least appreciated services in any ecosystem: decomposition and nutrient recycling. Insects are the world's great recyclers, breaking down dead organic matter and returning nutrients to the soil, where they can be taken up by plants, beginning the cycle anew. The process begins almost immediately after a plant or animal dies. Within hours, flies may arrive to lay eggs on a carcass. Beetles appear to feed on dead wood or decaying leaves. These pioneer species are just the first wave. As decomposition progresses, different species arrive in succession, each specialized for a particular stage of decay. Consider the fate of a fallen tree. As the tree lies on the forest floor, fungi begin to colonize the wood, breaking down the tough lignin and cellulose that give wood its structure. But fungi cannot do this work alone. They need help from insects. Wood-boring beetle larvae tunnel through the log, fragmenting it into smaller pieces with vastly increased surface area for fungal and bacterial colonization. Termites, with their symbiotic gut microorganisms, can actually digest wood, breaking it down into simpler compounds. In the process, they release nutrients that would otherwise remain locked in the wood for decades. The insects don't work in isolation. They carry fungi and bacteria with them, inoculating the dead wood with the microorganisms needed for decomposition. The insects fragment the wood, creating pathways for air and water to penetrate deeper, accelerating the decay process. And the nutrients released by decomposition feed the insects, which in turn feed other animals, transferring energy up the food chain. Studies have shown that in many ecosystems, insects are responsible for 50 to 80% of the total rate of decomposition. In their absence, dead organic matter would accumulate far faster than bacteria and fungi alone could process it. This would tie up nutrients, slow plant growth, and dramatically alter ecosystem structure and function. Leaf litter decomposition follows a similar pattern. When leaves fall in autumn, they're quickly colonized by insects. Springtails, tiny primitive hexapods related to insects, are often among the first to arrive. They feed on fungi growing on the leaves and on the decomposing leaf tissue itself. Orbited mites join them, along with the larvae of many different fly and beetle species. These organisms shred the leaves into smaller and smaller fragments, breaking down the physical structure and releasing nutrients in the process. As the litter decomposes, it becomes incorporated into the soil, where it improves soil structure, increases water retention, and provides food for the incredible diversity of organisms living in the ground. Soil invertebrates, including many insects, create pore spaces in the soil that allow water and air to circulate. They mix organic matter from the surface down into deeper layers, and their waste products, rich in nutrients, fertilize the soil. Some insects have evolved highly specialized roles in nutrient cycling. Dung beetles, for example, feed on the feces of large mammals. When a pile of elephant dung appears on the African savanna, dung beetles arrive within minutes. They roll balls of dung away from the pile, bury them, and lay eggs inside. The developing larvae feed on the dung, breaking it down and incorporating it into the soil. In the process, they bury nutrients that would otherwise remain on the surface, making them available to plant roots. They also reduce the number of flies and parasites that breed in dung, providing an important ecosystem service for grazing animals. Studies have shown that in pastures with healthy dung beetle populations, grass growth can increase significantly, soil fertility improves, and populations of parasitic flies decrease. In Australia, when European cattle were introduced, native dung beetles couldn't efficiently process the unfamiliar dung. Cattle dung accumulated on pastures, reducing grass growth and providing breeding sites for pest flies. The introduction of African and European dung beetle species solved the problem, demonstrating the critical role these insects play. Carrion insects perform a similar service for dead animals. When a vertebrate dies, blowflies often arrive within minutes, attracted by the smell of decay. They lay eggs, and within hours, maggots hatch and begin feeding voraciously on the soft tissues. A single carcass might support thousands of fly larvae. These maggots can consume a remarkable amount of tissue in a short time. A dead rabbit can be reduced to bones by maggots in less than 2 weeks. Other insects follow in succession. Carrion beetles arrive to feed on the decaying flesh and on the fly larvae themselves. Dermestid beetles come later, feeding on dried skin and hair. Eventually, the carcass is completely recycled, its nutrients dispersed into the soil or carried away in the bodies of the insects that fed on it. This rapid processing of carrion has important implications for ecosystems. It prevents the accumulation of carcasses, removes breeding sites for disease-carrying flies, and returns nutrients to the soil. It's a service that occurs largely unseen, but it happens constantly, everywhere animals live and die. Insects also influence nutrient cycling through their roles as herbivores. When insects feed on living plants, they accelerate nutrient cycling in several ways. Their feces, often called frass, is rich in nutrients and decomposes quickly, providing a readily available fertilizer for plants and soil microorganisms. Herbivore damage to plants can stimulate increased leaf production and alter the chemical composition of plant tissues, affecting decomposition rates when those tissues eventually fall to the ground. Some research suggests that insect herbivores can actually increase plant productivity by speeding up nutrient cycling. Grasshoppers, for example, selectively feed on certain plant species and avoid others. This changes the composition of plant litter, favoring faster decomposing species and making nutrients available more quickly. The net result can be an increase in total plant growth, even though the grasshoppers are consuming plant tissue. Social insects like ants and termites have particularly large impacts on nutrient cycling because of their sheer abundance and their nest-building activities. Ants move enormous quantities of soil as they excavate their nests, bringing nutrients from deep layers to the surface and mixing organic matter into the soil. Termites process vast amounts of dead wood and plant matter, returning nutrients to the ecosystem. In some tropical forests, termites are responsible for processing the majority of dead wood, playing a role equivalent to that of fungi in temperate forests. The scale of insect impact on nutrient cycling is staggering. Scientists have estimated that insects are responsible for moving more soil than earthworms in many ecosystems. They process more plant litter than all vertebrate herbivores combined. They recycle nutrients at rates that can significantly influence plant productivity across entire landscapes. Yet, this work happens largely out of sight. A rotting log may look still and dead, but it's actually teeming with life, much of it insect larvae working to break down the wood. A pile of leaves is not just plant debris waiting to decay. It's a complex ecosystem where insects and other decomposers are actively transforming organic matter back into forms that can support new growth. Understanding the role of insects in decomposition and nutrient cycling is crucial, especially in the context of insect declines being observed in many parts of the world. If insect populations crash, the consequences for nutrient cycling could be severe. Decomposition rates might slow, nutrients might become locked in dead organic matter, and ecosystem productivity could decline. The invisible work that insects perform, breaking down the dead, recycling nutrients, maintaining soil fertility, is as important as their more visible roles as pollinators or prey. It's a reminder that ecosystems are not just collections of individual species, but intricate webs of relationships and processes, many of which depend critically on insects. Now, let us step back from the details of adaptation and ecology to consider the big picture. Just how successful have insects been? What does it mean to say they've taken over the world? The numbers are staggering. Scientists have formally described and named approximately 1 million species of insects. But this is certainly only a fraction of the true total. Conservative estimates suggest there are somewhere between 2 million and 5.5 million insect species on Earth. More optimistic estimates run as high as 10 million or even 30 million species. To put this in perspective, there are only about 6,000 species of mammals, about 10,000 species of birds. Insects outnumber all other animal groups combined. Of all the described animal species on Earth, roughly 80% are insects. If you were to pick an animal at random from the total diversity of animal life, there's an 80% chance it would be an insect. Within insects, some groups are extraordinarily diverse. Beetles alone account for over 380,000 described species, making them the most diverse order of animals on the planet. There's a possibly apocryphal story about the biologist J.B.S. Haldane, who, when asked what could be inferred about the Creator from studying nature, replied, that God must have an inordinate fondness for beetles. Butterflies and moths, the order Lepidoptera, include over 180,000 described species. Flies, the order Diptera, include about 150,000 species. Ants, bees, and wasps, the order Hymenoptera, include over 150,000 species. And these numbers continue to grow as new species are discovered and described every year. But diversity is only part of the story. Insects are also incredibly abundant. It's estimated that at any given time, there are approximately 10 quintillion individual insects alive on Earth. That's 10 billion insects. To put it another way, for every human on the planet, there are roughly 1 billion insects. The biomass of insects is similarly impressive. Although individual insects are small, their collective mass is enormous. Some estimates suggest that the total biomass of ants alone is comparable to the total biomass of all humans. In many terrestrial ecosystems, insects represent the largest fraction of animal biomass, sometimes exceeding all vertebrates combined. This abundance translates into ecological impact. Insects consume more plant matter than all vertebrate herbivores combined. They pollinate the majority of flowering plants. They form the base of food webs, providing food for countless birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. They modify soil structure through their burrowing and feeding activities. They disperse seeds, control populations of other insects through predation and parasitism, and influence plant evolution through their feeding preferences. Insects have colonized virtually every terrestrial habitat on Earth. They're found from the equator to the polar regions, from sea level to the highest mountains, in rainforests and deserts, in freshwater streams and lakes, in caves and on glaciers. Some insects even live on the ocean surface, with marine water striders skating across the waves far from land. Their distribution is truly global. There are insects in Antarctica, though their diversity is limited to a few hardy species. There are insects living inside volcanoes in Hawaii, feeding on wind-blown debris. There are insects that spend their entire lives underground, never seeing daylight. And there are insects that live in clouds, feeding on microorganisms in the airborne moisture. This global dominance is the product of all the innovations we've explored. The evolution of flight, which allowed insects to disperse widely and exploit resources in 3 dimensions. The development of metamorphosis, which allowed for life cycle flexibility and reduced competition between juveniles and adults. The evolution of diverse feeding strategies, from herbivory to predation to decomposition, allowing insects to exploit virtually every available food source. The development of sophisticated physiological and behavioral adaptations for surviving environmental extremes. The evolution of complex social systems in some groups, magnifying their ecological impact. Each of these innovations built upon the others, creating a cumulative advantage that has made insects the most successful group of animals in Earth's history. They survived the mass extinction at the end of the Permian, the most devastating extinction event ever recorded. They thrived in the shadow of the dinosaurs. They survived the asteroid impact that ended the Cretaceous period and wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs. They've persisted through ice ages and warm periods, through the rise and fall of mountains and the shifting of continents. Today, insects continue to evolve and adapt. Some are evolving resistance to human-made pesticides. Others are shifting their ranges in response to climate change. Some have become specialists on human-created environments. thriving in cities and agricultural landscapes. The story of how insects took over the world is not a story of the past. It's ongoing, playing out all around us every day. In a quiet moment, you might notice a line of ants marching across your kitchen counter, each one following the pheromone trail of the one before it. You might see a butterfly landing on a flower, its long proboscis uncurling to reach the nectar deep inside the bloom. You might hear the buzz of a fly or the chirp of a cricket. These are not just isolated events. They're manifestations of a 480 million year journey from the first tentative steps onto land to global ecological dominance. They're proof that insects haven't just survived. They've thrived, adapting, diversifying, and flourishing beyond measure. As we drift towards sleep, let's hold on to this thought. The world we inhabit is, in a very real sense, an insect world. We share it with creatures whose evolutionary achievements rival or exceed our own. Creatures whose societies can be as complex as ours, whose engineering can be as sophisticated, whose success can be measured not in centuries, but in hundreds of millions of years. From ancient seas to every corner of land, from the depths of the earth to the heights of the sky, insects have spread, adapted, and conquered. They are the hidden architects of ecosystems, the tireless workers that keep the natural world functioning. They are pollinators and predators, decomposers and engineers, partners and competitors. They are, without question, the most successful animals ever to live on Earth. As you close your eyes tonight, imagine all those billions upon billions of insects, each one a tiny miracle of evolution, each one playing its part in the great web of life. The ants in their underground cities, coordinating their activities with chemical precision. The moths navigating by moonlight, their wings beating hundreds of times per second. The beetles burrowing through logs, recycling the forest. The bees gathering pollen, connecting plants separated by miles of landscape. This is how insects took over the world, not through conquest, but through adaptation, not through dominance, but through diversity, not by overpowering their competitors, but by finding niches no one else could fill, by evolving solutions to problems no one else could solve, by persisting when others faltered, by thriving in conditions that would defeat almost any other form of life. Their story is one of resilience, innovation, and extraordinary success. And it continues, every moment of every day, in every ecosystem on Earth. Sleep well, knowing that the world outside is buzzing, crawling, and flying, with the activity of these remarkable creatures, these six-legged masters of survival, these insects that truly have taken over the world. If you've enjoyed this journey through the epic story of insect evolution and dominance, please consider liking this video and subscribing to Bedtime Biology. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Where are you listening from? What aspect of insect evolution amazes you most? Your engagement helps us continue to explore the wonders of the natural world, one peaceful night at a time. Until next time, sleep well, dream of ancient forests and tiny pioneers, and remember that the smallest creatures often have the biggest stories to tell. Good night.